Hello, this is Amanda Hubble, and this is my presentation for Educ 458. And oh, excuse me. And this is my presentation for the Adaptations presentation. My partner and I were given conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, otherwise known as ODD. Let's get right into it. Okay. So what is conduct disorder? Conduct disorder, or ODD, is it's a behavioral disorder. So this kind of encompasses a lot of different disorders, including bipolar, oppositional defiant disorders, conduct disorders. So a lot of the time we can characterize this as emotional disorders, emotional behavioral. So kids who have conduct disorders, you'll see it mostly in their behavior. They can be, but aren't not limited to these things. They can be aggressive to people or animals, or materials. They can be destructive. Sometimes they can be deceitful, so they can, quote unquote, not hear what their teacher might say. They also might disregard what the rules are because they feel that either the rules are not fair or they shouldn't apply. And sometimes they struggle with empathy and understanding other people's feelings. However, students who have conduct disorder or emotional disabilities, they also can have a intuitiveness and a creativeness that can really lend themselves to a great understanding of concepts in your classroom and can really add to your classroom environment. Let's move on. Okay, some data. Some data about people who have oppositional defiant disorder, which is not easy to find. My partner, I found a few statistics, but there's not a lot of hard data as of yet. As a lot of us know, emotional disabilities are sometimes the last to be recognized and the last to be studied. So most of what we're seeing is about 10% of the U.S. population has oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorders. It is more common among boys, so about 11% males and about 9% females, but it is generally more recognized in males than females. Females may be easier at concealing it, or we just don't see it in females. However, most children and adolescents who are diagnosed with behavioral disorders can grow out of them and can grow out of them as they're adults, so they function regularly. So implications of these disorders in your classroom environment. So you might have to worry about your students following class rules, like cleaning up after themselves and following instructions. And then they may struggle with working in groups. Sometimes they might struggle with working with students who they feel get treated better in their class, or students who they just they clash with. Sometimes you just clash with somebody. And then sometimes they can have trouble staying focused on assignments because their brain is just not interested in doing what you guys are doing in class that day. In your academic instruction, students with these behavioral disorders, conduct disorders, may struggle with the structure of lessons. They might not be interested in the way you hope to present material. And basically that means that you as a teacher have to be very flexible, and you have to be ready to change up what you're doing or move things around. Next is social behavioral. They might struggle relating to other students or other people in your classroom if you have an aide in your classroom or you yourself. And that can make group work more difficult. And then you have to worry about their socialization, if they are getting enough socialization. They can have outbursts in class, and that can really ostracize them from their peers. And then it kind of creates this idea that they are they're the problem child, when really they just have special needs, and you have to be aware of those special needs. And then on the opposite range, they can shut down and they can really just be not interested in completing what they need to be working on that day. Okay, so the strategies that we're going to be talking about are strength-based and enhanced human resource-based. So you can, in strength-based strategies, you recognize students' strengths and work off of those. So what's really important here is communication with that student, which with that student's other teachers. If they have a special needs teacher, you can be communicating with them, communicating with parents at home and other adults who care about that student. And then enhanced human resources is the team approach. So this is also about communication, which personally I think that's the most important part of being a teacher is communicating not only with your students, but with your other teachers, with administration. And then there's different types of strategies. There's peer meditated, self-meditated, and then teacher mediated, or sorry, not meditated, mediated, peer mediated, self-mediated, and teacher mediated. Okay, so moving on, we're going to start talking about strategies, some more specific ones. This first one is peer-assisted tutoring, and it's strength-based. So if anybody has listened to any of my videos before or seen any of my PowerPoints, you'll know that I'm interested in becoming a theater teacher. So I was doing an experts grouping. So I would have students grouped into production design teams, and then each of those students would get a different role, whether it's a director, a costume designer, a scenic designer, and each of those production design teams are designing their own show. So I picked, for example, Alice in Wonderland. So each of those people would have a different type of job. So a director would be looking at concept and really big picture ideas. So like, for example, you're doing Alice in Wonderland in India instead of Victorian England. And the director would be in charge of researching India and what time period in India. And that would be their job to pick those things. And then the costume designer would focus just on costumes. So what would the version of the White Rabbit look like in an Indian version of Alice in Wonderland? And then the scenic designer, what does an Indian Wonderland look like, right? So these are all like more specific things, which is great because then you can have your students who need to have a little more adapting in this area. They can have them be more specialized. So say they're really interested in fashion, then they can be a costume designer and they can be designing costumes. Maybe they really like building something and working with their hands. Maybe they can be the scenic designer and they can make a small set even out of, Legos or dollhouse parts, right? So there's lots of different options that you can do. So all of the production design groups break up into their specialty groups. So all of the costume designers will talk together about how they're going to make their costume designs. And in those designer groups, in the specialty groups, costume designers would all learn how to sketch something, how to sketch a costume, for example, and they would research their costume designs. Then the design teams come back together. So they bring what they learned in their specialty groups back to their production design groups. I really like this for students who have special needs because you can specialize what they are going to go look at. So maybe they're more adept with a computer. Maybe they're really good at research and going into those black holes where you just find stuff and you keep going and going and going. Maybe they're really good at that type of research, and that would be a great thing for a director, for a production designer, something like that, right? So this is a good way to kind of diversify that way. Okay, our next strategy is a teacher-mediated and enhanced human resource strategy, and it's journal check-ins. So in a regular time frame, whether it's every day or every week, maybe every Friday or every Wednesday, whatever, students are asked to document their behavior and their emotions and see how they're doing, and it's just a good way to keep track of how they're feeling, right? So And then they and the teacher can talk about it, or the teacher can go over it and maybe write back in the journal if that's what works best with that student. And I think it's good to give the student a lot of options about how they want to communicate how they're feeling, right? So they can journal, they can do bullet points, they can do a drawing. I like those charts that they're doing right now, where you have a chart on the outside of your door and you can point to how you want to greet each other, whether it's a smile or a wave or a hug or a fist bump. I think that's really great. And so you can do it like a chart like that. Again, I'm thinking about secondary education students. So I'm thinking about junior high and high school. And then a teacher can monitor the entries and then have check-in meetings with the student, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. And then communicating with other adults and making sure that everybody who's the team around this student is aware of how this student is doing every day in the class. Okay. So now that we know about those strategies, what do we do as teachers? And I think there's four important things. Be proactive. So think about what's going to happen, not just today and tomorrow, but next week and next month. And communicate with anybody you can who has any understanding with the student. And also don't be afraid to communicate with the student, right? I think that's a really important part of this relationship that we as adults forget sometimes, that how these kids feel and what they want to do is important to them more than anybody. And then make sure you're consistent with who you're checking on. Make sure that there's make sure there's stability at home, and then make sure you're consistent with how you're treating that student in your class. Okay, I'm going to do my last slide, which is a very short one. It's just my sources, just so you know they're there, and they're the CDC, AACAP, and then mentalhealthamerica.net. So if you want those links, I'll try and put them in the description. Okay, thank you so much. Talk to you guys soon.